There's a story behind the story that's been told about Black faith in America. In the South, before the Black church became an institution, before the pulpit and the pew, there was the hush harbor. And all you had to do was follow your gut to get there. The hush harbor was a secret covert site of alternative intelligence. It was a hidden grove in the woods, a carved out clearing between the trees, where yonder did not exist. It was a place where African tradition, ancestral connection, and embodied imagination birthed the people who, as Ta-Nehisi Coates says, had been made into a race. This invisible institution would become more visibly known as the Black Church. And to me, it is the first expression of resurrection technology in Black America. I'm Tamie Spencer-Helms, and this is Black Modern Mystic. In this episode, we'll hear from Worldbuilder and wonder specialist Naya Abernathy and Elder Leroy Barber, pastor, author, and pioneer of justice-rooted faith spaces, as they talk to us about the purpose of the clearing, the tradition of the Black church, and what it means to do and be hush harbor today.
I was literally shaped by the Black church, saved by the Black church, right? And people don't like when I say that because they say I'm saved by Jesus. Yes, absolutely. But the Black church was something I could identify and feel and be a part of.
Like Starlet in episode 1, Leroy found the Black church to be a carved out clearing for who he was authentically. I asked him to tell us a little bit more about that.
I now can name that I'm a mystic and probably always have been. An innovative person and entrepreneurial spirit. That's just something I can look back at and go, man, that's been there my entire life. And so what it brought up in me was questions about everything, right? Like, sit in a Sunday school, but I got a question about how you're saying that, right? Or, the preacher is saying something and I'm like, yeah, but I got a question, right? So connect that with a somewhat hard life. When I got around 10 or 11 years old, my family got evicted from my home. I went to high school one morning, my first month or two of high school, and came home in the afternoon, and our stuff was home. My mom was frantic about us being evicted. So those two things kind of made me lonely in one respect, because I had all these questions about all these things, but then all of this pain, and it was my church absolutely that lifted and pulled me through that. So I can give you examples. We had a Bible teacher who on Friday night started this kind of teenage Bible study, whatever it was, and would do it at Friday nights at 7 o'clock when the adults were having some Bible study. So we wound up in this space. And this teacher, for my entire high school life, every Friday night, met a bunch of teenagers in there and let us ask whatever we wanted to ask, and would consistently say, no, tell me what you think, right? And created this thing in me that, I didn't have to I could ask my questions and I could give my opinion, and it was perfectly fine. And this person saved my life in that way.
To think of the Black church as a clearing, there are fundamental components that must be involved. Leroy states that he had the ability to ask questions and to disagree and to figure out what worked and what didn't. I asked him to elaborate on what could make a Black church a clearing experience.
I love the story about clearing, because in some sense, our our work was clearing space for young people, clearing space for people who sat outside the system, right, and didn't fit in, clearing space for leaders of color through our work. And so I love that. I love this idea of the clearing because people need space. They need space to develop, space to learn, space to ask questions, space to mess up, right? Without people coming down and judging them and all that. So all of that, I think, kind of connects back to this idea of clearing.
In the beginning of that portion where Baby Suggs does her instructive monologue with the group, there is the physical clearing, but one of the things that I think is really interesting is that she does a somatic clearing prior to the invitation of imagination. And I think this is really important because there's so much that we hold in our bodies that can inform our imagination. So when I'm reading that, I'm thinking about the clearing as place and the clearing as practice. And so, and those bodies being in the ecological place to practice the embodiment of the clearing that they're in. This is not a new technology, but it's one that I think needs to be remembered and brought back into our practices. And you see her inviting folks into things like laughing and dancing and crying when they first get there. And then we're walked through how first she assigns it to certain people, groups that are there, and then the groups switch, but everybody goes through the laughing and the dancing and the crying, right? And then once they've done that and they have spent their bodies and they're on the ground, she says, now imagine, and invites us into a place of imagining where we've created space to do so in ourselves, between one another, in the ecological space that's mirroring what's happening in the body. And one of the things that's really interesting about that piece is that there's this noting about how there isn't a path taking you right to the clearing. You have to know that it's there. But it says the deer know how to get there, right? And so there's wisdom in the ecological relationships in that space that know about this place of clearing. And there isn't a well-worn path to get there. And I think that's important to note, that this is a pathway, or to get to the clearing, there is an intuition, there's an attention that needs to be paid outside of you, but to the other beings that are connected to you in your place, because there's wisdom in what they know about place that we can borrow to then get to these spaces where we can clear out the stuff that has wounded our imaginations, that has told us that we can't love ourselves, we can't trust ourselves. And to get to a place where we can practice things that get that intuition back online, that reconnect us to that self-love, and that we can do that together. It's happening with individuals, but it's happening with individuals co-regulating together in the place of the environment and the ecology. And while the Hush Harbor or the Black church maybe borrowed or was influenced by the Hush Harbor, it didn't necessarily, especially in this current iteration of it, it doesn't hold that same freedom and openness and honoring of the flesh and the body and the co-regulating that happens when we're talking about the wisdom of our bodies and the wisdom of our bodies being together. That is something I think that in the Black Pentecostal tradition, you can find that it might not be named. Nobody's saying we're all gonna co-regulate together. That's what we're doing, right? When we're singing together and we keep wanting to sing the same refrain over and over, or when there's a call and response, or when there's testimony service, or when there's a praise break. All of that is this embodiment in a way that connects us to ourselves and to one another and to our stories that we're not allowed to do outside of that space. And then when we talk about things like, oh, the Spirit is here, that sense is, I think, a connection, a bond. It is the warming of a bond that's always there. That we have the space and we have the cadence and the ritual to come together and warm that bond that connects us to Creator together. And that is something that, as someone who is no longer participating with the Black Pentecostal Church, I miss that. I miss those moments of, regardless of everything else, right now, there is an electric connection between us. And there's something resourcing about that. But the problem is, so many of us cannot participate and still be whole in that place at the same time. And we need to be able to do both. And that's what the clearing offers. And I think that's what the Hush Harbor offers. The spirit of the Hush Harbor is a place where you could be whole. You can cry and wail and laugh and dance and lay on the floor and pray and do your root work and speak in tongues and lay hands on each other and bring your plants into the room and have your rituals and there's something available that I think a lot of us are craving that existed there that I don't think we're going to find it in an institution anymore. We're going to have to do some Hush Harbor-like moving and creating and innovating to get into that space of wholeness and being held.
Outside of oral tradition, we don't really know exactly what the Hush Harbor looked like or was. But its praxis lives on in our traditions, in our creativity, and in the ways we carve out clearings. When I asked Leroy and Naya to describe to us what Hush Harbor praxis looks like in our age, in our day, in our time, here's what they had to say.
If you want to yield to Spirit and let Spirit speak to you, this building, this church, this structure will not be able to hold you. It can't. Because Spirit, Holy Spirit, right? The God of the ages, the creator of the earth, speaks through Spirit. And no building can hold that. No structure can hold that. No ordination space can hold that. And so if you are a fugitive, if you are out there because it can't hold you, you're in the right place for Spirit to be. And like Jesus, sitting with the man born blind outside of the system, and goes, I am he. I'm the one. Right? Says to the woman at the well, if you knew who I was, you would be drinking. And she goes, give me that. Right? This whole thing is about the fugitive. You are the center of this work, this life, this spirit on the earth. The whole thing is about fugitive. The Hebrew midwives were fugitives. They came up with a system to come against the Pharaoh of their day. Ruth and Naomi were fugitives. Rizpah stands outside and does not let buzzards eat her children's bodies until David buries them. And a whole fast A whole famine is lifted once David gets a clue and buries her sons. You're not a fugitive. You're the center of the story. There's no other center to this. Everywhere we see the church becoming institutional, centering all of the building and all the relics and the blah blah blah. That's not the story. Paul they try to kill that thing. He gets blinded on a horse, and the people he was killing take care of him. What? This. So anybody sitting outside, I'm drawn to let them know. No. They flipped the story on you. That's not the story. The story is you are the center of what Creator wants to do in the world. That stuff is what drives empire crazy, because it cannot control it. And that's where I think that's where I know the historic church has been. And I can't wait for the church now to be forced back underground, because that literally is where our power sits.
And so if I'm a world builder, and so if I'm imagining the world that I want to live in, if I'm imagining the world that I want my grandchildren to be growing up and creating in, when I'm looking and seeing who my counterparts and my colleagues are, who are also trying to imagine a different world and the things that are coming up, there's 3 different pillars kind of slotted in these same places, right? So in this new world that we can co-create, and I think are in the process of co-creating with Spirit, because some of these things are just coming in as the energy and the time shift into where we are and where we're going. So these 3 pillars of this new triangle, a new triangle that very much harkens back to some knowings and some returnings, is the divine feminine in place of the church, cooperative economics in place of capitalism, and contextualization in place of colonization. And the divine feminine is an energy, is an embodiment that I think you can find. I'm not a religion professor, but I'm assuming you can find it in any religion, that there is a divine feminine figure that you can point to, be inspired by, listen to her story. In the church, it's going to be Mary. And there is something to be said that when God decided to show up in the earth, God said, "And I will come through the womb of a woman, and she will be the one who raises me." That's not a small thing. And that's not necessarily a hearkening back to Catholicism, but I think we can borrow from their focus on her role and then update it a little bit. When we're talking about cooperative economics, it is, though that can be something, that could be a lot of things, but what it means is it's not about economic domination. It is about an economic mutuality. And how do we then cooperate in a contextual way? And that contextualization replaces colonization. Because what colonization said is that this is the way it needs to be done. This is the way it will be done. And it will be set up by force. Contextualization says, what do we need here? Who are the people? What is this place? I don't need the same things that I need in a plains area or in a desert that I need in, like a place that has like trees and hills, or a tropical place. We don't need the same thing. So what is our place telling us that we need? Who are the people here now, today? Who are the people here? All of them, not just the ones who have resources and access, but especially the ones who don't. We can ask the questions about why, but let let everybody who's here, human and more than human, contribute to what this context needs to thrive, for all of us to thrive, right? And to be in that relationship that if you go back far enough, everybody was in an earth-based relationship with place. And so as I'm kind of dreaming forward, these are the things that I think about when I say, how does the world have to be reconstructed so that we're not continuing to repeat the same things that we repeat over generations and centuries and millennia? And I'm like, there's gotta be a totally different foundation and structure that we're actually dreaming into and building on. And if we can lock into that, I think there's something really beautiful that can come out of it that is on its way, and we don't have to fight it. We can co-create with the energies that are here with us.
The Hush Harbor may have been hidden, but it was never invisible. It manifested itself in the campuses, the congregations, the causes, and the communities that coalesced into a culture. What happened in those carved out spaces where we could love our flesh was more than worship. It was resurrection technology. It was a sacred refusal of death-dealing theology that gave birth to the Black church, the blues, to the b-boy, to Beyonce. In the next episode of Black Modern Mystic, join me and my friends Professor X and Nick George the Poet as we dive into the ways our favorite genre, hip-hop, inherits the alternative intelligence of the Hush Harbor. Passed through rhythm and coded language, the Hush Harbor gives us permission to speak in our own tongues. It teaches us how to hang on to the best things, even when yonder says we can't.
Thank you for listening to Black Modern Mystic, as made by Dr. Mommy. Oh, and don't forget to support